Hey, everybody, welcome back. I am Emily Moyer. My good friends, Howdie McCoskey and Michael Wan are with me. It's been a little longer than it usually is since our last episode, but this is episode number 6 of the Real Trilateral Commission. Gentlemen, how you doing this morning?
Howdy.
Generally all right. I've got lots of things going on out here. I am surprised on the choice of topic because I was so prepared for what I thought she was going to choose, and she threw me a curveball.
Well,
What did you think she was going to choose?
I thought she was going to choose the William Shatner going into outer space. I was
I did
almost
too.
like, I thought this is going to be, because it
I
would have
thought
been
so
everywhere
too.
she looked. So I thought that's what it was going to be. And when I
It
got the
threw me
choice, I was
off
like,
too.
wow.
So, all right. So here's, first of all, before we get started on the surprise of topic, I want to thank actually both of you gentlemen, as well as all the people who've been enjoying these shows that we've been doing, because I get a ton of comments and emails from people who found one or the other of us through this combination of things, and they hadn't known of the others before and whatnot, and people really seem to enjoy it. And this was something we thought we'd just kind of like try on a lark once or twice, and it's turned out to be really cool, and people really appreciate it. So thank you to the audience, and thank you to you guys, because this is a lot of fun. Yeah, so here's the deal. So I like, when you responded to me, Howdy, I still hadn't heard that news of William Shatner and the Blue Origins, right? Because so there's two ways it could have gone if I had, right? It could have been, oh, I want to do that topic because I've actually been there, right? Which very few people have. I mean,
Outer space?
Well, yes, that, and also the Blue Origins landing site, right? I've been so when we moved here from Los Angeles, Jeff was with us, and he had figured out where this place was, even though it's not, the location isn't really publicly available. And we took a side trip off of our road to get here to go. We went significantly out of the way, but actually the content of that road trip, Michael made up an episode for us on either Project Kids or Glass Bead Game. My assessment of being out there is that nobody is going to space from there, right? It's an underground base, just like the ones that we know elsewhere. And, you know, I have interesting opinions on space, like unless space is under the ground in Chatsworth and a few other places, I'm questioning the extent to which it exists, at least in the way that it's been described to us. So for that, I don't know that I think there was that much to say about it, other than the obvious propaganda, but I didn't know about it. So I can't say that like, oh, I just wasn't impressed with that story and didn't pick it. I didn't even know what you were talking about when you said that. And it actually didn't show up in my newsfeed until yesterday. Now, granted, I was traveling and you know, kind of looking at doing other things. I wasn't paying as much attention to media as I normally am, but it never came through in my regular sources. That, like, the sources that I check every day are Zero Hedge and Rents, and then I occasionally check Revolver or Drudge Report or one of the other, MSN, Yahoo, something like that. But it hadn't come through on any of my media till yesterday. So that's probably why I didn't. But then when I saw this, I was having trouble finding anything, because everything was about, you know, the virus, the Coke, the mandates, the strike, all of that kind of stuff, right? Like every story was about that kind of, what, Southwest Airlines and whatnot. So then I found this, and when I started reading it, I realized like this was like a good sequel to my previous choice, which had been Bob Ross, because there was the questions of him, if it being CIA or CGI. So I think this is like, you know, the next sort of link in the chain that's going on the block, right? So that was kind of my thoughts. It was like, thank God I found an article that isn't about any of the obvious things. And then it was like, okay, this is the good next step. So that was how I chose.
Well, I'm excited to see what we get at today. And this is a little bit of a different type of article. And so we'll see where we go with it. Can I share a little something before we begin?
Yeah.
I can. Good. So before we start recording, we're just kind of catching up, and I was sharing how I went to Colonial Williamsburg this past weekend, and you brought up the underground bases. That's one of my favorite things too. You know, that all roads lead underground, I suppose. At least in my mind, they do. Yeah. And And the thing which was so interesting for me about Colonial Williamsburg, which is this living museum, this living ARG, which people step into and they're completely immersed. I think the phrase they like to call it full spectrum. What does the Air Force call it? The full spectrum attack, because that's what it is. Like
full spectrum dominance. Full spectrum.
Yes, it's full spectrum dominance for anyone who goes in. So I'm walking around, I'm watching all this stuff, and I'm just like in awe of seeing this. How it's done, and like, the fact that this whole thing was funded by John D. Rockefeller Jr. in the 1920s, all of that, my head's kind of like spinning with that. But then there was this one piece of information which was kind of like spoken. I was there with, it was like a family event, and the person who chose this location has probably been to Colonial Williamsburg 20 times in their life. Like, they love Colonial Williamsburg and they know everything about it. And they made two different references to tunnels, to the whole thing has with tunnels. Now, the way they were coming at it was like this very nothing to see here, folks, like they're just tunnels. And so the example of what they were talking about was there are all of these authentic taverns that you can go to in Colonial Williamsburg, and you get like the colonial food, but they don't have like full commercial kitchens, because it goes against the fact that like all of these fake buildings, which were supposedly real buildings, but they're not, they don't have commercial kitchens within them. And somewhere underneath Colonial Williamsburg is a large scale commercial kitchen, which does all of the cooking, which is then like, distributed to like the taverns. And, it makes sense if you're like approaching it as like, oh yeah, this is like a fun experience to go and learn. But like, going along the lines of the how did Kubrick film or fake, the film the fake moon landings with all of the people involved, and like, how could that happen? Like, the general rule of thumb, if you go down that line of thought, is that it happened during the filming of 2001 Space Odyssey, and only like a very small handful of people were aware of this other operation going on simultaneously. And I think that's a modus operandi we see all the time. Like, you've got something which has a seemingly legitimate cover for like why this is in existence. So there's nothing to see here, folks, and there's something else going on. So in the event that there is like something underground within Colonial Williamsburg, like this, and their tunnels, and who knows how deep, because this is very close to the NATO East Coast headquarters in Norfolk, Virginia. Maybe that makes sense. But there's one other piece of history which kind of popped up in doing a little bit of research on Williamsburg, ties into this as well. Colonial Williamsburg, the operation to turn it into this living museum began in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And in 1938, the wife of Manly P. Hall, her last name is Bauer. I can't think of her first name, but she led it, but Manly P. Hall was involved with it also. They were absolutely convinced, based upon all of these crypts and symbols they found within Francis Bacon / William Shakespeare's works, pointing to a secret vault built originally in Jamestown and then moved to Williamsburg, and they were looking for it. It was filled with all sorts of secret information. And in 1938, they were given permission to go to this one particular church and to do some excavating, and they didn't find anything. And then again in 1992, like the interest in this idea of there being secret hidden information buried beneath Williamsburg popped back up, and it became a national story, actually an international story at the time, of people coming and looking, all these new agers looking for the secret stuff, but it's all buried underground. So I wanted to just like throw that out there, because, we like to talk about weird stuff, and it's a little bit personal because I was down there and I thought that was all kind of interesting.
So since you said it, I'm going to comment on it. So you said that the two people that you met that were archaeologists were from Lancaster, right? And which is also like the Amish community there. You and I have talked about the possibility of their underground, what they're preserving underneath there, what is actually going on. And it's interesting that the archaeologists you met were from there, right? Almost as if either looking for that kind of thing, or they know like not to dig any farther when you find this because, right, blah, blah, blah. Because as far as I understand, that there's a lot of connection between that area of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and those areas of Virginia in terms of, you know, A, their history, but B, the groups of people that were sort of settling there and doing things and would understand the way it all works, right? So like whether they be wittingly, you know, agents or unwitting agents of preserving the underground sort of, you know, whatever it is of that area of the world, it just is interesting to me. So anyway,
certainly.
Let's get on with the show. So,
all right.
All righty. So I found this article that was basically like a summary of a show. I guess it had been on 60 Minutes that was titled Synthetic Media, How Deepfakes Could Soon Change Our World, right? And of course, like, what, you know, there's always the acting like that this is something that's about to happen, right? But hasn't happened yet. Right. And that's always the give that we're dealing with. You know, if they're telling us about it, it's because they're done with the secret aspect of the operation. Right. It's already been weaponized and used to accomplish a goal. And now it's being offered to the plebes for commercial purposes or for, you know, whatever it is. Right. And so, you know, basically what they're talking mostly about deep fakes, but I really like the term synthetic media better than just deep fake, because I think synthetic media is broad and allows us to imagine other parts of this. Like the deep fake is just like kind of one idea. And what the deep fake is a combination of AI and deep learning, right? And so that's kind of like, it encompasses just a small set of like styles and techniques, where this idea of synthetic media is much broader. So I think that's really more of the truth than just the deep fake. And there's a quote fairly early in the article that was interesting to me. It said, "The US government has grown increasingly concerned about their potential to be used to spread disinformation and commit crimes." Right? That's just a hilarious, I just had to laugh out loud, because it's the US government itself that, you know, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Smith-Mundt Act, but it was repealed as part of like the 2011 or the 2012 NDAA, right? Authorization of use for military force, the rule that said you couldn't propagandize your own country was repealed, right? They used to just do it in Europe, around the world, and now they do it here. So they're concerned. They were so concerned that they removed this protection from the American people on a certain level. So that was hysterical. So we already have the absolute inversion. And then the first thing the article really moves to do is this, like the Tom Cruise part, right? Because if we all, that's the deep fake we've all pretty much known about, right? There's like one of Joe Rogan talking that is widely known amongst people in the alternative media. And then there's this sort of Tom Cruise one, right? And, you know, him being the first really big deep fake, I find interesting, because I think the argument could be made that the entirety of who Tom Cruise is a deep fake or is synthetic media, right? And then they talk about, and how when these Tom Cruise videos came out, they used TikTok. And I think that like TikTok, one could argue the entire purpose of the platform was for synthetic media. And right? And we remember there was a period of time for like a week when Donald Trump had banned TikTok, and then suddenly it wasn't banned anymore and whatnot. But if you think TikTok is also where we met Javier, right? The gentleman who's in 2027 in Valencia with no people, but able to communicate back to people here. So this platform is being used for a variety of different kinds of synthetic media or other kinds of deep fakes besides just impersonations of people. So that was interesting to me. And then they next start into talking about how you do this is you start training a deep fake model, right? And they described all these different techniques of how you do it. You actually, in this case, he was getting an impersonator to do movements and then coordinating them with actual video clips of Tom Cruise. And thinking about the amount of time it has taken him to train the deep fake model. And then you think of like training an athlete or training a horse for racing or something like this. Like, why is this a good use of time, right? So they're talking about that. And then the reporter for this story, like the main anchor for 60 Minutes, is Bill Whittaker, right? And if you look at Bill, what's interesting is that most of the people in terms of media personalities that this chose to focus on all look like they could be deep fakes or synthetic themselves. The people that are running the technology, it's a little bit more questionable when you look at them. But Bill Whittaker, if you had to pick one anchor on one of these programs that looks almost constructed because he just is an unusual looking person in that way, it would be Bill Whittaker, right? He could, I mean, you know, I think this is the question that we all need to ask is, you know, for how many years have we been like, are we sure that the media anchors, that the news reporters on these programs, are we sure they're really people? Like, I don't see them when I go out to dinner. Like in Hollywood, I see some celebrities. I don't think I've ever seen a news anchor or a person who hosts one of these shows, right? So it's interesting that they started doing some of this stuff with his face, right? And they did one where they took him back to what he supposedly looked like 30 years ago. And for me, like my intuition was like the deep fakery in the media really probably started about 30 years ago. We often hear that like the weaponized technology is like 50 to 100 years ahead, but 30 is reasonable also. So I thought that was interesting. And my guess would be that was when we really started to see some elements of that, even if it was just with like, you know, computerized touching up of people's images and stuff like that. And then the next person they go to is this woman named Nina Schick, right? Who also has that sort of synthesized look about her. And the quote that starts, so she's like a person who advises, she's like a political technology consultant or whatnot. And she has this quote that says, "It is without a doubt one of the most important revolutions in the future of human communication and perception. I would say it's analogous to the birth of the internet." Well, that's really interesting because you start to, like, we're hearing about a lot right now is Internet of Things and Internet of Bodies, right? And how does this play into that, as well as just like the computer programmed reality, right? She pretends that she happened upon this technology when she was advising European politicians on Russia's use of disinformation and social media to interfere in democratic elections, right? So that whole sentence is a ridiculous sentence, right? So why is there an American political consultant advising European politicians on Russia's use of disinfo and social media? Like when we just talked about our own government doing the Smith-Mundt thing and whatnot, and we obviously have been propagandizing other nations, you know, for a very long time, and we interfere in every election. So this idea that we have to protect, you know, the rest of the world from other people and not from ourselves is hilarious, right? But she talks about it being used for disinfo and manipulation, right? Hyper-real fakes. Like she thinks that these hyper-real fakes are a game changer from a disinfo perspective, right? Now there's tons of disinformation, the term disinformation in this article. There's no use of the term misinformation. It's disinformation, right? Which is interesting, and I'll get to that in a second, but I just wanted to note that there because that's when she's talking about it. And she said that so far, there's no evidence that deepfakes have changed the game. Or I don't know if she's saying this or the writer of the article. So no evidence of deepfakes having changed anything in US elections. But the FBI is saying that Russia and China are creating deepfake journalists to spread anti-American propaganda in social media. Right. So there we have the complete Russia and China thing. Like the first comment was just about Russia. Then they bring China into it, which is interesting because China, that was part of the whole thing with Tik-Tok, is that it was a Chinese creation and whatnot. So these are only being used to spread anti-American propaganda. It couldn't possibly be being used to spread anti-China propaganda or anti-Russia propaganda. And then the article claims that government and big tech are trying to detect synth tech, but they're in competition with deepfake artists online. So this sounds a lot like the problem that the mainstream media is having with the alternative media and misinformation, right? Like we're in this competition and we have to do all these things to protect the people from the YouTubers and the TikTokers and whatever, right? So, what does that say? Oh, so they start talking about how the first place, of course, this technology made its signature was in pornography and in the defacing and defiling of women, right? They always go there first, right? And then they immediately begin feigning concern over how this is going to be used by YouTubers and TikTokers, like I said. And then they show an example of a deepfake, right? Like beside, we're all familiar with the Tom Cruise one, but the one that they chose to show as like the kind of thing you might see on TikTok or YouTube, right, was this one right here. Like this is not a deep fake. There's nothing, this does not even look like remotely the same person, right? So they're scaring people. They're trying to say this is a serious problem, and then they're showing us this, right? Which to me was just like, I mean, a 2-year-old could tell the difference between those two. I wouldn't have gotten confused if I saw this man and not this man and thought one was my daddy and the other, you know what I mean? Like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. So there was that part of it. And then they start talking about, Michael, I thought this was interesting because I don't know if you remember when we had Rico on, Rico Rojo, he was explaining to us the difference between GANS, which are generative adversarial networks, and goons, which I can't remember the exact definition of goons, but the goons is more like playing with each other to like optimize things for both of us, whereas the adversarial one is for one person to win and the other person to lose and the game to be sort of over or whatever. So they're saying that this technology makes use of general adversarial networks, and the AIs are competing to make the best fake synthetic content. That's an interesting sentence to me. Fake synthetic content isn't synthetic. Doesn't that imply generally that it's fake to begin with? So now we have synthetic content that's real and synthetic content that's fake. So it tells you that a lot of the content we've been looking at already was already fake. So this is like the faker fake, right? So I thought that was interesting. And then they start talking about the best example of this technology is this this person does not exist website. I think, Michael, you and I may have even talked about this at one point, right? Which is where you can go and there's like a completely made up person there, right? Every time you go, it'll show you a picture of a completely different, completely made up person. And, one of the things we've all talked about this in many ways, I'm sure, but a lot of these people that we're told are school shooters and stuff like that, they all had this sort of synthetic created look, like this couldn't possibly be a real person, right? And when you look at that website, and it's even called "This Person Does Not Exist," how many times in conspiratorial videos have we heard the person who was trying to deconstruct the hoax say that, I don't even think this person exists, right? And so think about it. We have your Lanza, the Batman one, right? You have all of these people that or non-people or whatever that look unusual, to say the least. They never look like you or I or Howdie or whatever, or Laura. They always have this look about them where you're like, that can hardly be real. And I think Lanza was the probably the epitome of that. And then this Nina Schick person says that the tech itself is neutral, and that a compelling case could be made for using it for commercial use, right? So it's bad if you use it for political stuff, even though that's what they're, it's been being used for that, but you could use it for commercial use. And then they get into describing what some of these commercial uses have been. And the names of these companies that are doing this are fascinating to me, right? So you have Synthesia, right, which sounds almost like synesthesia, which Michael and I have spoken about, extensively, which is also about confusion of perception, right? So Synthesia would replace camera with code, right? So they create digital avatars that basically allow one of two things. That can be a completely created person to just deliver messages, or they can use it for sort of multiplication, meaning the example they used was Snoop Dogg did an appearance in a voice piece for a company, right? And then that company has a subsidiary that operates in another country in another language. And instead of having him record it again, saying the different thing, they use the deep fake to make it do many things. So he only had to show up for one day of work, but he got paid for all of these different campaigns in different countries that were all slightly different, right? And so the idea is you can make money without going to work, right? Because it's important that we do that. And then, so she talks about how synthetic media could be a virtual gold rush. And then they go on to talking about this gentleman named Tom Graham, who is one of the people who are all responsible for this technology look more realistic than the ones who are sort of presenting the other information about it. But Tom Graham is a lawyer who made his fortune in crypto, right? So we have that sort of fake computerized money here. He didn't get rich through the law, he got rich through crypto. And he started a company called Metaphysic. So again, with this sort of, spiritual, metaphysical, like, perceptive, sixth sense kind of language, right? The synesthesia, the metaphysic, right? And he started this company with the guy who was responsible for the Tom Cruise deepfake. And their goal is to make Hollywood caliber movies without lights, camera, and actors, right? Like, so, I mean, I don't understand for me what the point of that is, but the idea that they're not already doing that, we've just lived through like a year and a half where supposedly everything was shut down, but there's been no stop in how much media is coming at us, right? And so and we know this kind of technology has been being used for a long time. When an actor passes away mid-roll, oftentimes they've used this. I mean, we've seen all sorts of stuff. So, so Hollywood uses it for sure. And then there's this part about, they start going into like the legal implications and the problems with this. And so apparently most deep fakes are considered protected free speech, right? There's a few exceptions, like in New York, there's a rule about not being able to use the likeness of an entertainer or performer for 40 years without their permission. And in California and Texas, there's rules about you can't use it to imitate politicians. I find it interesting because these have been three of the states at the forefront of what we've been hearing about things going on politically over the course of the last year with decisions being made and whatnot, right? But the deep fakes are considered to be possibly disinformation, and disinformation is protected free speech, right? Now, when we're getting our stuff censored on these various platforms, we're being accused of misinformation and misinformation. So I think they're trying to create this separation where the synthetic media will be protected, but truthful media, if it's not in alignment, won't be. So we have the disinformation, misinformation sort of parting of the seas there. So our favorite Nina Schick, her solution, the anti-Russia propagandist or whatever, is just knowing what it is and that it's possible. And what she says is really interesting. The question is, how do we inoculate ourselves, right? And understand that this content is coming, right? So I think that the choice of the word inoculate is interesting, considering that this has really been, I think, this kind of technology, while it's been at use for a number of years, it's been at its height during this period of where we've all been inoculated, right? To some degree or another, either with, propaganda, or some people have really been inoculated, not really, right? And that this idea that this content is coming, right? So it's not something we have to worry about. They want to really let people know you haven't had to worry about it up to this point. Up to this point, it really has just been the Tom Cruise thing, right? But going forward, it might not be. And at the point of time that this article comes and this story is coming, we're in this place where we're kind of like one aspect of the operation seems to be wrapping up and we're moving into another part, right? And I think they want to make this delineation before that starts. And then she says, how do we not lose trust in authentic media? That's the question, right? As if there is any authentic media and that any of us trust it, right? So that this is just like like ridiculous idea after ridiculous idea. And then there's this idea that seeing is no longer believing, right? And so you cannot believe your eyes, right? So you cannot rely on your own research, your personal experience, your own senses or whatever, because everything could be fake. And there will obviously be a society of humane technology, which I've talked about with Danny before and whatnot, there to tell us which one is real and which one is not or whatever. But this idea, and this is fascinating, right? That you and I, speaking of our own personal experiences, will not be protected free speech, right? But that this completely created false thing will be free speech. Now, I wonder if they're going to legislate the speech of the deep fake as well, or if the deep fakes, because they're not actual people, will be able to say anything. Like, it's interesting to see how this will go. And it makes me think about some of the stories you hear about. I'm going to try and say this because we try to put the show up on YouTube, right? That some of the people who might have some of the things in their bodies are no longer going to be considered humans because those things are patented. Right. So it's along those sort of same lines. It's like giving free speech rights to things that are not organic, and then taking human rights away from things that are no longer organic because something has been altered. right? So it's just a part of that whole sort of, mess and ball. And so like, those were kind of my, my thoughts with this. I think the timing, I mean, obviously we've been aware of deepfakes for a couple of years. It's been talked about in the alternative media. I think like, maybe when Edward Snowden first came around, right? And we started having the conversations about whether he was CGI or whether he was real. And then the next thing was like, we started hearing about deep fakes. Well, maybe he's real, but maybe some of these things that they're doing with him aren't. That was the first time I really started hearing about that. So that was back in like 2014 or 2015. But now this idea of synthetic media, as if it hasn't already been, I think is being pushed hard. Like the story came out the same week that we had the fake whistleblower from Facebook. I think also on 60 Minutes. She was also on 60 Minutes, right? And of course, she's partnered, I'm pretty sure, with this Tristan Harris guy in the Center for Humane Technology, right? So I think this is all part of this. And I think they're going to try and sell us on the idea that sometimes the most humane thing to do is to not get your information from another human, right? Like this kind of, it's very, I don't know. The whole article is kind of ridiculous to me, but it felt like a really good next logical step from where we left off the Bob Ross thing, and sort of questioning the idea of what we've actually been looking at for the last period of time. So that would have been like the prior period of time, and then this one, the one after. So I think I'm going to stop here and hear what you guys have to say. And then, oh, look at that. The alarm just went off. That was good.
Yeah. Michael, start.
First off, we covered many of the same sort of parts, where you and I are going to go. My presentation will be very similar, but slightly different than yours. So there's that. But what you focused on, which I did not so much, was the whole the laying out of what's to come with the legal implications of free speech and who can say what and what's going to be considered authentic, and we're seeing, and what's been fact checked. We're seeing the beginnings of that also, like, happening in parallel. Like, there are official fact checkers and they'll tell you what's accurate or not. So I found that part very, very interesting. And the Snowden thing, I mean, we could go down that, is a really is an interesting point to bring up also, in terms of the history of deep fakes and the idea that this has been going on for a while, and now it's just being kind of like rolled out. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in my presentation, but just like what 60 Minutes is, and like, who their audience is, and how they are prepping their the minds of their viewers to go and interpret what is to come. But for people who've been on this for a while, like, you could go back in time and start saying, hey, how long has this been going on? Great points. Enjoyed your presentation, Emily. Thank you very much. That's really all I got to say about that before I get into my talk.
So just in response to that, the other thing with 60 Minutes is, at least as long as my life, you always have it there with the stopwatch ticking, like almost as if like they are the arbiters of time. Like, not only are they keeping track of the 60 minutes of the show, but like this is sort of a barometer for how we measure things in a larger way. And the other thing that I forgot to mention is, I think a lot of this is to keep things focused on just the media aspect of this, whereas I think the deep fake is going to move into like the surveillance realm, right? Because we now have people with things inside their bodies that are generating the same kind of fields that computer chips and electronics do. And so this is going to be able to be happening out on the quote unquote reality game board, or the ARG, right? Where things are going to be able to be projected onto or morphed or changed. And so people think, oh, it's a media thing. They're not thinking of it as a reality altering thing in what they think of as the separate part, right? And we hear a lot of stories about facial recognition technology and all of this kind of stuff. I think this is accompanies that, right? Because so I think that they're selling people on fear of surveillance technology, right? But they have something else going in the background here as well that is oftentimes what we see. So anywho, yeah.
The one comment I want to say that before I hand it to Howdy is like my thought, and I'm not going to cover this in the presentation, was like thinking about this technology and like just deep fake, like the ability to create deep fake and or synthetic media, and coupled with at least now what we think of as like virtual reality goggles and glasses, and when those two combine, and particularly thinking of like ARGs, and I talked about Colonial Williamsburg as like a living ARG, like I mean that's what an ARG is, a living sort of immersion, the full spectrum dominance. But like when you've got like deep fake technology and you are surrounded in that virtual reality goggle, and I just know what it looked like 10 years or 3 years ago, whatever that looked like that is so immersive. That is so immersive. Like you could be in your flotation device with that thing on, and it is exactly what the movie The Matrix. Like that's how you get there. That's how it feels that real. Who knows? That could be happening now, but I think that's an interesting point that you brought up as well. Howdy?
Yeah, I mean, that was a really good overview of the article slash 60 Minutes program. Because I'm going to go a completely different route than everything you talked about there. But one thing I thought was really interesting about when I watched it, and Emily, you can comment on it, is, well, they interviewed like 3 people, right? They interviewed 3 different people. Not one of the 3 people had any concerns or felt there was anything wrong with it, or they didn't. Normally, when you're going to have a news story with something controversial, you will usually interview one person who is like negative or against, who is on the I don't like this and this is why, and then you may try to spin it and make them look stupid, but they didn't even put that in the article. There was, or in the interview, there was no interviews with anybody who was in any way felt it was wrong or creepy or a problem with it, and I thought that was really strange.
No, I agree with you. I think the only thing that even comes close to that is this woman who's saying, oh, we have to be worried that Russia might use it for anti-American propaganda on social media. So it's the same story we hear about why we have to be worried about everything, what the Russians might do to it. And like, I don't know, I know the Russians are really good with a lot of stuff, but like, I don't know that like creating, fake Hollywood movies or newscasters, I don't know that they have the upper hand to America on that, or right? So it's the same. The only concern is the same false concern that we get about everything else. There's never any acknowledgement of reality. There's only acknowledgement of this like ridiculous, hyper paranoia fetish about Russia. Right. And that's not to say that Russia is wonderful or perfect. Right. But it's like the only itch they ever scratch. And they just let all of the other bug bites, fluster and flourish or whatever. Right. So anywho, yeah. Good point. So, all righty. Who's going next? Michael. Laura says Michael is next.
Okay. All right. Are we good with that, Howdy?
Sure. Go ahead.
All right.
Mine's going to be so different anyway.
So where am I? I think this is it. All right. I'm going to ask for like a 5-minute warning for when I have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
All right. So 60 Minutes limited hangout, selling deep fakes to the world. I think it's not just a limited hangout. I think it's also like a mockery mindfuckery. There is a mockery element in this. So we're going to begin with this. I think that this wasn't an article. This is just a transcript of the 60 Minutes piece. You brought up Tik-Tok earlier. Tik-Tok, 60 Minutes, it's the same idea. So keep that in mind as well. They both have to do with those clocks. To put in context, so like 60 Minutes is one of the longest, if not the, I think Meet the Press is. I think 60 Minutes may be the second longest running TV show in the American media market. Let's just focus in the most recent history, because all media or all news media changed with COVID, and 60 Minutes was at the forefront of introducing COVID to the world. So This is just to put into context of who these folks are. When 60 Minutes broadcast its first COVID story on Sunday, March 8th, 2020, they're ahead of the curve, guys. They are the ones who are laying the foundation for how the 60 Minutes audience, so who's watching 60 Minutes, it's a very specific demographic, they're setting it up. And so just to give a point of reference of how they come into it, I think at the beginning of this, it was hard to take seriously for some people because they didn't know anybody who had it. This is this one person talking to this secondary 60 Minutes media thing called 60 Minutes Overtime. And what they're basically saying is if it wasn't for the likes of 60 Minutes, like people wouldn't have believed that this was real because they weren't seeing anything with their real eyes. But luckily, 60 Minutes let everyone know that this was a real thing from the very, very beginning get-go. And they're talking about from the beginning, about how 60 Minutes was in bed and understanding about the strange coincidence that the Johns Hopkins Center of Health Security was doing this multinational simulation 4 months before the COVID-19 epidemic began. So just point of reference. So we're going to go to Tom Cruise. Like you, I find Tom Cruise a very, very significant symbol for the introduction of like deep fakery, synthetic media into the collective mind. The Tom Cruise TikTok deep fake videos were really the first introduction all around. If you've been following deep fake technology for a while, this wasn't new, but when you saw that was a big deal. And you begin to think of, I agree with you. I think all of the celebrities are false personalities, but then how fake does it go? Whether they're clones or just made up, I don't know. But 60 Minutes, Mission Impossible, and Tom Cruise within his filmography, he definitely has strong connections within intelligence agencies. I think of both the telling of the Ethan Hunt Mission Impossible stories, TikTok, you got the countdown going on with that, the same sort of like hypnotic suggestions. And then also him playing the part of Barry Seals in whatever that movie was, where they kind of told that story. But what I find most interesting thinking about Mission Impossible, and this is kind of that mind fuckery, is one of the gimmicks of Mission Impossible is the ripping off of the mask. What you see is not the real person. And that's what we're seeing all of this is about. It's the same thing. It's the same idea. Oh, this is someone with a digital mask of Tom Cruise. But I've seen this so many times, like, within Mission Impossible, he rips off this mask and he's someone else. And that's a real thing. This article, this gathered steam, if you could look closely, the Daily Mail is always an important piece of propaganda direction for me. And so this came out in December 2019, a very important time. And it's telling the story of one time when the CIA head came and took off a mask in front of George H.W. Bush in the White House, and how much it tickled George Bush. And like, here are pictures from that event, but it's the exact same thing. You see like this person right here taking off what was this mask of, and they say it right here in the article, of this Mission Impossible type event. Like, they're making fun, like this whole thing. It's like, there's a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing going along with it. I agree with you. When I saw Nina Schick,
yeah.
Right? I was like, this ain't a real person. She reminds me too much of Sophia. I've seen this face before. I know who this person is. She's not real. So, but I'm going to go and check. Maybe she is real. Who knows? So here we go. We go to her website, and she's a beautiful woman. She's a young woman, and she's very, very influential. I'm not saying that young, beautiful women can't hold positions of great influence, but I'm saying this, I'm suspect whenever I go and see it. So Nina Schick, no, this is her about page. No sort of history on who this woman is. No biography on who this is. I spend all of my research time on people always reading the about me section. So I have a good point of reference for like what information is included and not included. And this is very, very limited. I'll say that. But what it does says is Nina has advised global leaders, including Joe Biden, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former Secretary General of NATO, and she advises private companies, government agencies, and NGOs.
It's
You know, her Schick, her last name is Schick. What is Schick? You know, it is a gimmick. It's a theme. It's theater play. So when we're thinking about this in terms of green language or twilight language, of like this kind of like fuckery with the people, they're telling you right away, this is a shtick. This is theater. This is wag the dog. So I did a little bit more digging, and you can find Nina's LinkedIn profile. And again, I'm not saying she's completely fake. I'm just saying I'm suspect. I'm open to this idea. So we go and we look at her resume in there. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to start. This is the most recent. She worked for something called Tamang Ventures for 3 years, 10 months. Then she was a political advisor at Dahlia Research for 1 year. She worked at CNN for almost 2 years. She worked at these two places for 1 year and 4 months. We go further back onto here. We could see that she worked for 11 months, 3 months, 10 months, 5 months, 9 months. Yes, we live in, the world's a little bit different in terms of how someone builds their experience, but this person has never worked at any place, any long period of time. So it's the whole thing is a little bit, but I'm going to go, and where do I want to go? So the most recent one is this Tamang Ventures. This is her own private company. She is the only officer there. It's based in the UK. You go and you look at the word Tamang, and Tamang is referring to an ethnic group of people from Nepal. I read her in one place. I saw a little bit on her biography. She has a very rich ethnic background. So I'm assuming that this is part of her background of the Tamang people. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. As a side note, I've mentioned this before, was this book right here by Peter Kingsley. And it's all about the importance of the Mongolian people and in the changing of culture. So I find that a little bit interesting, but that's just off on the side. The second company which she worked for prior to that was this Dahlia Research. She was a political advisor. That company is no longer in existence. If you type in, you look for them, you see that they were purchased by this Latana company in I'm not certain when, but Latana, it began its quest to understand human perception. It's all about human perception. This is about creating reality. All right, let's go a little bit deeper, because this is where we get the only real meat in this woman's resume. And it's when she worked for simultaneously, she was an advisor for the Alliance of Democracies Foundation and Rasmussen Global, both at the same period of time, January 18th through April or March of 2019. These are both organizations which were started by this guy right here, Anders Rasmussen. But we'll go look at this real quick. We can see that the first summit for this Alliance for Democracies, Joe Biden was there, 2018, Tony Blair, Mike Pompeo, John Kerry. We could also see that the foundation hosts a Transatlantic Commission, that we should maybe get them on our show. And we see that it was founded in addition with Chertoff and Biden. These are the minds behind where all of this is coming from. What we also see right here, Rasmussen Global is very much involved. The guy who's doing it, the person involved, this Rasmussen, who I'll get to in a moment, he was a non-staff advisor to Ukraine. So it's all about Ukraine and Biden. We could see how all of that connects when we go into like the Russia stuff. Let's look at Anders for a moment. Anders was the 24th Prime Minister of Denmark and the 12th Secretary General of NATO. So this is where this guy gets his, why he's someone who other dignitaries will pay money for his opinions. Here's an article from 2019 in Foreign Affairs, which is the Council on Foreign Relations their quarterly periodical. He wrote it with Chertoff. I'm assuming everyone knows who Chertoff is, 9/11 and all that sort of stuff. If not, I don't have time in the 20 minutes, but we could see where he's connected. And this is about the unhackable election. Remember, they're talking about like you said before, it's all about these hackable elections. And we keep on seeing it framed up about Russia and Hunter Biden and all that other stuff. But that's also been a really big piece in the American media over the past year about false elections and so forth. We could see this. This is from earlier right here. I'll just read this. The agreement of San Francisco follows a broader memorandum of understanding signed at the 48th World Economic Forum annual meeting at Davos, Switzerland, in the presence of WEF founder and Klaus Schwab, Danish Prime Minister Rasmussen, and WEF President, whatever. The point I'm just trying to make is, like, you know, she's a spokesperson. She's a spokesperson for this guy who is like on par with Chertoff, on par with like Klaus Schwab. Like, it's the same folks. It's like, you know, this is Sophia of this, you know, she's the pretty face that we go and we get to listen to. I did find this very interesting. I found this testimony from the guy Rasmussen, who she worked for, who was undoubtedly, like, you know, her mentor when he spoke to the House Intelligence Committee. So I just pulled out a couple things. This is the transcript. So this was spoken from this Anders Rasmussen. Last year, my foundation, the Alliance of Democracies, who she worked for, produced the single biggest international survey of attitudes towards democracy. It found that peoples in autocracies are more satisfied with their governments than those living in democracies. It's high time for the world's democracies to come together and fight back. Like, what the hell does that even mean? If the people are happy in their autocracies, which I'm not saying is a good thing, why is it your job to stop them from being happy? Why aren't you asking why aren't the people in democracies happy? Like, that's just like a point of the farce of this whole thing and who they're working for. But we should all know that by now. And then this one other part. Second, we must consider foreign meddling in our elections and democratic institutions. At the Alliance of Democracies, our flagship initiative, the Transatlantic Commission for Election Integrity, a bipartisan initiative joined by Chertoff and Biden. Again, the irony, the fuckery, which is like, you know, being presented as our synthetic media. You know, again, you know, it's all theater play. It's the quest to understand human perception, you know, and I'm just pulling up the latest, you know, what even is this? These in your face false, like, sets for the White House. But I'm going to go in a little bit deeper. You mentioned the other people they talked about. Here's Victor Rappelli, CEO and founder of Synthesia, that was you were talking about, or however I pronounce it. What I found interesting about this, looking at their website, they say very proudly. So it's this website for this company which wants to be on the cutting edge, giving everybody the capability of doing synthetic deep fake technology. This is Synthesia, and they are a proud member of the Content Authenticity Initiative. Your entire company is based upon inauthentic content, like, you know, the irony. And it's called CAI, you know, kind of close to CIA. And then you go to the CAI website, and we're focused on cross-industry participation with open and extensible approach for providing media transparency to allow better evaluation of content. All right, sounds really good. Let's go look at their partners. Let's see who are all of the people who are so concerned about this transparency. You know, whether it's the BBC or Gannett, New York Times, Microsoft, Getty Images. You know, these are the main people who are behind the CAI initiative. We see Synthesia is on it, USA Today, Washington Post, Twitter. The biggest players of like the opposite of that are leading this initiative for transparency. Okay, 5 minutes. Thank you. So now we're going to go to Tommy Graham. Tommy Graham is the guy who's paired up with Chris Ume, the guy who is credited with introducing Tom Cruise. I don't buy any of that story, but nonetheless, we'll go and look at this guy who looks Eckhart Tolle. Is this Eckhart Tolle's son? I don't know. But anyway, so here we got the metaphysic, Eckhart Tolle, metaphysics, Chris Ume, all that sort of stuff. So let's go look at this guy a little bit. Let's go look at his LinkedIn right here. And we see Tom, prior to this company that he's working with Kume before, he was working with this guy, Tom Mozak of MIT. And these guys, they created the world's fastest database and first GPU and memory analytics engine. That's beyond my pay scale. I don't know what that means, but I do know that In-Q-Tel is one of their founders. And so, I'm not saying everything that is funded by In-Q-Tel is CIA oriented, but actually I am. I am saying it. That is the very definition of In-Q-Tel, is that it is CIA funded. So we've got that going on. So to go and round it all up is the ridiculousness of this entire story, because Nina Schick says, and was to your point, Emily, that technology itself is neutral. So just as bad actors, remember, Schick, theater, the interchangeableness of the word actor, from a political context to like movies and all this. So just as bad actors, and she's talking at least seemingly about like politicians, without a doubt are going to use deep fakes, it's also going to be used by good actors. By definition, good actors should not be using deep fakes. But she's saying this, like, what does that even mean? So first of all, I would like to say there's a very compelling case to be made for the commercial use of deep fakes. No, there is not. There is absolutely no compelling case for it. All it can do is confuse every single person about what is reality. But that is what you're all about, is creating perception. And so I'll go and I'll end with this one right here. Bill Whittaker, to your point earlier, Bill Whittaker not being real, I've always said the same thing about Lester Holt. I think he's the fakest person I've ever seen. I don't think he's real. So this is what Tom Graham says. I think it is a great thing if you're a well-known actor today, because you can be able to let somebody collect data to create a version of yourself in the future where you could be acting in movies after you're deceased. Why is that a fucking great idea? Why is that a great idea where you have no control over your likeness and what words are being put in your mouth? That is the worst friggin' idea I have ever heard. But they're saying it. This is how like, the creating of reality through propaganda and all this stuff works, is from an authoritative case where they say it and you just accept it. Okay, you're right. That is a great idea. If you were wondering how all of this, this was the last thing you said. This is the most ridiculous story I've ever seen, but it is par for the course when you look at all of the people who are putting it out, whether it is 60 Minutes, whether it is Rasmussen with his NATO Ukrainian connections. It's like, yeah, this is how they're putting it out there for us. So that is my presentation on the deep fakes. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to get on a soapbox and scream like a lunatic in my basement. I am stepping into the stereotype of the conspiracy theorist. I'm not living in my mom's basement, but I am in a basement right now. And I placed the mic back into the center.
And Michael just made up 1 minute from the 3 minutes he went over last time we did this show. So you just been credited back. You credit a minute there.
I'm glad someone's keeping track.
Yes, Laura loves doing stuff like that. Okay, so a couple of things. So she advises Joe Biden on deepfakes. Howdie's turn. Oh, he goes first? It's Howdie's turn. I'm sorry. Go Howdie.
Yeah, well, interesting stuff. I was wondering who you were I knew you would dig into somebody. I was wondering who in the article we were going to dig into. And is he going to dig into Tom Cruise? Is he going to dig into Bill Whittaker? Who's it going to be? For me, I think the question that would come out of that for you would be, how much do you think, because of course we know the technology is ahead of where it is now. Whatever they present, they're 10 years ahead of it. So do you think they have the capability to create like deep fakes on the street?
What do you mean
I'm wondering.
deepfakes on the street?
Like you're passing a person on the street and you think you're passing Joe Blow. Is it really Joe Blow you're passing, or do they have the technology through some sort of, these wireless networks to actually place an image on a
You
person
raise
walking down the
such
street?
like
Do you
that's a
think?
big question, right? And I ask myself that all the time. Like, what are we? The very definition of, and that's why I brought up Williamsburg in the beginning, because it is, and I kept on using this full spectrum. What's the last word? Full spectrum attack, dominance, full spec, like this idea, and what that implies is, if something, a full spectrum dominance is, it is so encompassing in your experience, you don't know it's there. You become blind to it. And so what I think you're asking, and it's a question I ask myself all the time, is if that has happened, if that has literally happened in what I think is my real reality, that there has been a full spectrum dominance, whether that's done with like Wi-Fi and like 5G or something else, I don't know. I don't know if there's a way to tell. But I am certainly open to that idea. But my personal thought, assuming that I'm not living in a completely like false construct, that this is my real body, I don't think that's there yet. I don't think that's there yet. What I do think is on the fly, deep fake technology can be created very, very easily. And I agree with Emily about the purpose of TikTok. Everything which we get from the media, which we see with our computer screens, like it's at least suspect. It's at least suspect for being deep fakes. That's my opinion on that matter.
Emily?
Okay, so well, are you done, Howdie? Or did you just want? Okay, cool. All right. So a couple of things. The first thing you brought up was how she has advised Joe Biden on deep. I would say maybe she is advising the Joe Biden deep fake, right? Mm-hmm. She is the person who's advised them on how to do this. And the theater play, right? We've now all been told that he does this from a set. Why would you need a set instead of being in the Oval Office, unless the technology needs to have like lights projecting from a certain way? They would have to literally rewire the whole White House to do the kind of technology that what it sounds like when I was reading into some of these technologies that it is, right? And so you also had said there was something with one of the guys working with In-Q-Tel, and he does GPU processing, right? So I think GPU processes is a gross processing unit or something like that. And I hear people in certain technological circles talking about how there's an enormous GPU farm that runs Joe Biden. And whenever the farm crashes, he has to step out of the spotlight for a couple, he'll go away for the weekend or whatever. And he goes away for a lot of weekends. Right. So if it requires a lot of GPU to accomplish this deep fakery, and that he's dependent on some of these farms for that process, my guess would be that there are these dangerous hackers, right, that are probably, even whether it be because they're political actors or because they think it's funny, trying to take this down. And that might explain why, like, sometimes we don't hear any gaffes and sometimes he can hardly talk and whatnot, like the state of the GPU farm. So there's that. Then the other thing is she worked for somebody named Anders Fogh. Like Fogh is a fake, right? And like the different spelling of it. But one of the people that I would say it's suspiciously has the characteristics of possibly being a deep fake participant would have been a gentleman named Anders Breivik, who I think did something in Norway, if I remember correctly.
Right. I remember him.
Real dude. He looked really like it was bizarre. He didn't look real, right? So we have Anders Fogh here. Right. And his company, like there was even a mention of Norway in his stuff, right?
Denmark. Maybe Norway too.
Said something about in Norway or whatever, Denmark, but it's in that area, right? So that may have been a place where this technology was really experimented with early on. And then you talked about this, she worked for some Dahlia company. Think about how the Black Dahlia changed perception, right? How the Black Dahlia was really a shift about like this, the way we look at some of these serial killers and murderers and whether women are safe on the street and all of that kind of stuff. So she worked for Dahlia Productions. And then she also worked for somebody named Borg Brenda, right? So it made me think of like a Borg, right? Like we're talking about like a cyborg here. So she had all of these funny things in her background, and you're right, she doesn't have any lengthy employment anywhere. It's like we just need to put in all of these, you know, pieces here to, you know, there's a code to decipher it, and we'll just turn the code into, you know, some sort of fake, you know, history of where she's worked or whatnot. And there was also one company that was partnered in all of this that was interesting to me. It was called Reface, right? And their insignia was like a manipulation of a Vesica Pisces, right? And think about how much Vesica Pisces is referred to in spiritual and metaphysical conversations about the time that we're in and things that are going on. And like the inversion of that, or like the screwed up version of that would be the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? Synthetic media. That would be taking something that is real, taking something that is not real, putting them together, and then creating the desired product, right? So I noticed that in there. And then Howdie, to your point, yes, I think absolutely there's a deepfake reality going on. I don't think it's perfected yet, but I think it is going on. And I was kind of referring to that when I was starting to talk about the survey. Like people are worried about being surveilled when they're out on the street. They're not worried about having their likeness changed, or the concern that they're interacting with things that aren't exactly what they seem to be. So that was kind of where I was going with that. But I have a couple of examples and experiences of how I think that this might be playing out, right? So years ago, when I was, you know, going to underground warehouse parties regularly, and I was doing a lot of drugs, and that's a perfect place to experiment because anything weird that happens can be written off to the fact that the person might be on drugs. And I've already detailed in lots of shows with people how there is a lot of military contractor kind of corporations that are sort of involved in the background, in my opinion, in some of these underground dance music scenes and more commercial scenes. But I used to have this experience where like, I would feel like people were bumping into me even though I didn't see anybody, right? Like I'd be dancing and someone would bump in, it'd feel like I'd get knocked or someone would bump into me, but I didn't see anybody, right? So I don't know if there was some kind of cloaking technology being used, right? And if they can make it seem like there's nobody there, then they could probably also do the reverse and make it seem like somebody is there that isn't there. So I used to have that experience. I also had the experience of lots of times people telling me that they had seen me at another party that I definitely wasn't at, right? So you could say that's like cloning or this kind of thing, but this could also be this kind of technology where you can literally project that one person looks like someone else. So when I'm out here, and then more currently, right, Michael and I've talked about a lot about like using ARGs or having neighborhoods that are sort of, there's a certain corporation or conglomeration of corporations in charge of running the ARG in that neighborhood. Some of the companies that are right along where I live here in Austin are pretty interesting to look at what they're developing and what they're working on. But I see things out here all the time in what should be a natural setting, right? Running around the lake, but it's really close to like the high-tech area of downtown. And I've seen people look like they wandered like into this reality from like a different movie or a different stage set. Like there was a guy in like a toga one day with like leather sandals who just looked like he did not belong at all. Like he was wandering around like he had just stepped into the wrong movie set or the wrong simulation, right? So that, and then I'll also see stuff, and I've shown this to Laura, where like, and it always happens on the same day. If I see one person like walking or running funny, I'll see 100 of them. And it's almost like they're experimenting with that tweak of the technology to make people's gaits or steps or whatever look funny. So that day, and I told her, she's like, nah, really? And then literally like the next 100, like there was like 100 people out there on the trail who were walking in a really noticeably funny way. And then the next day, none, right? So it's almost like they're tweaking certain kind of aspects of that. And I don't think it's in broad use, but I think places that I think that there are certain areas where they're experimenting with it, either because they have the ability based on the technology, like maybe there's lots of weird different kinds of towers, right? We noticed on our trip this time, there's like all different kinds of things that we would think of as 5G towers, but look different than the other ones. You see like all sorts of weird posts and different kinds of things. And like, we don't really have an explanation as to what all the functions of these things are. And there's a lot of them in certain areas and not in other areas. So I think that, and then also I think it's definitely being used in like, when you have like a festival, right? Like when you have like Coachella, or when you have, you know, some kind of thing where people are coming in and setting up a temporary fake reality, obviously in places like Disney World and Williamsburg and whatever. But I think some of the highest end, like the most cutting edge experiments are being done in the temporary setups, right? Mostly with music festivals, technology festivals, all of that kind of stuff. So there we go. Great presentation, Michael. I totally enjoyed it.
Well, thank you.
Your turn, Howdy.
Howdy, you're up.
I'm up. Okay. So, like I say, I kind of had an idea now that I've got to know you guys a little more of where you're going to go. And so I kind of knew, okay, don't look into Tom Cruise, don't look into Bill Whittaker. Someone's going to do that. Someone's going to do that. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to roam somewhere completely different. I want to see where this will take me. So I just played around with these deep fakes and looking around, and I bumped into something that had been on my mind already, and that was the dead internet theory.
Oh,
which links to this whole idea of what's real and what's fake, right? And however, when the dead internet theory tends to be presented, it's not really being presented even correctly, it seems. It's like there's a general idea of it, and then there's like 20 different offshoots of what people are presenting it means. So if I could nutshell it for people who don't know what this is, and I highly recommend you look into it, it's the idea that the internet we all knew, say from like the early days till 2010 or something like that, which was a particular kind of internet based on real people making real websites and connecting and talking and sharing and presenting their own opinions, slowly in the last 10 years has been sucked apart, and that internet is literally gone, and that a new internet has been created, so to speak, one made mostly of artificial intelligence and bots. And that the internet you experience now generally is not so real from the standpoint of that. I think what they're trying to say by dead, the internet we knew and the things that were there are no longer existing. And I had been for a while, when I first started researching my books about 5 or 6 years ago, and there's things I hadn't looked at for 5 or 6 years, and I went trying to find them on the internet, and I knew what I could search and track those websites. And when I would put those search things in, they didn't come up. I couldn't find them anymore. If I didn't have the web address, they were like gone. They had disappeared. So I started realizing something's wrong with the way, first of all, the searches are running, because I can't search and find things anymore like I used to. That was the first concern I had. Of course, we can all see the bots and, okay, who's really there, who's really talking to us? Is the comment from a real person? Is it from an AI generator? Okay, but when I looked into this, the part of the dead internet that really blew my mind was how big really is the internet that we are active on right now. That's the part that kind of blew my mind. And I'd first seen this about a month ago. Matt over at Quantum of Conscious did something on this, and then but it wasn't until now, until you posted the story, Emily, that I looked into it further. And that's the concept of when you do a Google search or search on any of the main search engines, how big do you think you're really searching? So let's just play one for fun here. Let's just do a Google search for everybody. Now I'm going to have to share my screen, right? So share screen. I'm sharing this screen. Yes, share. Okay. So you have my screen, right? So let's play for fun. Why can I not use my? Okay. Let's look for, because I had a friend who's there. Portugal. Fantastic. It's telling me there's 1.2 billion search results. That's what Google tells me. It took 7.75 seconds to do it, but 1.2 billion search results for web pages on Portugal. Now you would think what you know about the internet, that makes sense, right? So there's like 10 things on the first page, 8 or 10 things. So you would figure if you get 10 per page, you're going to need like 129 million pages of information on Portugal. Now this is what you think, right? Let's have fun. Oh, I can go to page 10, and I'm showing page 10 of still 1.2 billion. Okay, let's just keep going. Page 14 now is next. So I go to page 14. Oh, still 1.2 billion. Well, I got ways to go. Page 18. Yeah, we're all still good. Page 22. Now you're thinking this is going to go on forever. That's what you're thinking. Wait a minute. Page 23. All of a sudden now, page 23 of 222 results. We go back a page. I'm on page 22. We have 1.2 billion results. But all of a sudden, we just lost 1.2 billion plus search results. And as you look at, let's look what's on page 23. So these are what the last things that have come up on your search on Portugal. Portugal's response to COVID-19, vegan in Portugal. This is actually in Spanish there. To tsunami warning network, Portugal's measures to combat money laundering, 6 reasons to study in Portugal, the World Fact Book, CIA on the CIA website, and gnarly sunset. And we're done. Now, it says at the bottom, oh, we've omitted some entries similar to the 222 displayed, right? And so repeat the search. If you actually do this, repeat the search with whatever, and you'll find you'll get another 150 results. Try it for anything. Try it for trees. I did it trees, stones. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you search for. Your actual search results are really minimal. So, okay, what does that mean? That's what I had to think about. Well, what does that actually mean? How do I unstop share? What does that really mean? It means either one of two things. Either one, there really aren't 1.2 billion web pages of information out there they just don't exist at all. So, but I remember when I used to search the internet, I could click links for 7 or 8 hours and just keep going from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to this website, and it just go forever. And there had to have been 1.2 billion. Or there are 1.2 billion pages floating out there somewhere in some sort of hyperspace, but you can't locate them because the search engines won't link you to them. One of the two has to be true. Either they don't exist at all, or they're there, but how do you track them down? Now, there are some obscure websites from my past that if I click I still remember the website. If I click it in, some of them are still around. I can find them again. If I try to search for them somehow, I can't locate them. There's just no chance. So this was the first thing that was coming to me from this deep fake, was this idea of the internet now has become the lifeline of the average person, not just for their information, but for what they do, what they think, who they interact with, the kind of our conversation ourselves. This thing couldn't happen without the internet. And we all still think the internet hasn't really changed in 20 years, that the internet of 20 years ago is the internet of now. And to me, the bulk of what dead internet theory is telling me is that the internet I used when I was, say, researching my book on Egypt is nowhere close to what's there now. It's very safe, very, very compartmentalized. Only certain things are easily sourced and found, and other things are pushed away. And even though there's supposed to be billions of websites, the average person probably visits 10 in the average month. And they maybe see a few others. Like even you, Emily, you said you have 2 news sources you go to all the time, as an example. So it's interesting how few websites we actually go and track down. How much of this information that was there is still available? The Wayback Machine, right, which is another famous thing on the internet where you can track old stuff. So I used to have a website a long time ago, like 15 years ago. And I was just curious, could I find it on Wayback? It's gone. It's like literally gone. I don't even remember. I didn't remember what it looked like, what the web pages were, what posts I had. I found it. It's on the Wayback Machine. There it is. It exists. It's totally there. All of my old articles and blog posts, most of which I'm like, oh, this is kind of crappy. This really sucks. Why did I can see why I took this site down. Actually, it's pretty average. But if I tried to Google search that or tried to use a search engine, I probably would never find it. So that's where the first part of these stories took me to, is this sense of how fake, you might say, is the internet. Fake from the standpoint of we think we are researching and tracking and finding information, but we are searching and tracking and finding information that is being allowed or presented to us to track. And the things and the places we used to go to, again, there's some of the greatest websites with the greatest information, with people that were just brilliant at the time, gone. And because I can't remember who it was or it's like I couldn't find it. Even if it's on this Wayback Machine, I couldn't find it. So that was the first thing that came out of this whole idea, is this sense of, where are we at with the standpoint just of the internet itself and what we think we're doing. If we're sitting here with, how can there only be 222 web pages that say the word Portugal in it? That's being presented to me. And it would be interesting to really track through what are the 222 results that are being presented out of the what should be 1.2 billion. What are the ones that are being selected? And out of curiosity, it'd be an interesting experiment. Would the 222 I get be the same Michael gets and the same Emily gets? Or would we all actually have completely different 200? We still get 222 results, but they'd be completely different for all three of us. They'd be somehow, without even knowing it, they've been compartmentalized for us. So that was the first part. As I'm running through the word dead internet theory, that's what I'm searching. I come across something totally bizarre. That's the movie Grease. Very famous movie from the 1970s, John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John, very nice 1950s music in it. And it, a dead internet theory on Grease. What? So I had to click into it. I was just so, so I clicked into it. And it's a theory that Sandy and even Danny in the movie, Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta, are both dead through the entire movie. And that the movie is like a fantasy. Sandy doesn't get saved on the beach. She dies in the ocean. I don't know when they're saying Danny died, but both of them are, because the end of the movie is so weird, right? The end of Grease is really goofy with the flying car and the going into almost into outer space. It was linking to my William Shatner thing. And this idea that, wow, if the movie is being presented as a sort of a, almost like not a purgatory, because there's nothing, everything works out perfectly for the characters. It's sort of this momentary change between death and being accepting of death, and that there's this experience being generated by your mind to not let you know, because you're not accepting being dead yet. It turns Grease into a potentially totally different movie. Now I want to see it. Now I want to watch the movie again and kind of see, am I going to get something completely different from the movie? Because it's certainly for anyone who's had a near-death experience, as I have, you sometimes actually sit around and stand there and saying, am I making this up? Did I really die in the experience? And I haven't accepted that. And this whole reality, the thing I'm playing with now is my mind not accepting it. And I have been and that's why my reality is so stupid and is so goofy and is so, so we've got that aspect to it. Then so as I began thinking of that, it started to make me think again about 2012. And this concept of, did something really happen in 2012? Now, we all went to sleep on the 21st and, oh, the world's going to end and it's all going to work. Fire's going to come from the sky and everyone's going to die. We all woke up on the 22nd or the 23rd. Everything looks the same. Everything seems like it always has. What a load of crock, this information. Maybe something did happen. Maybe the old world that we knew actually died, when we all on one level died, and we all somehow have morphed into this new sort of similar reality. And that's the moment when, if we could start tracking, when could we no longer start tracking on the internet? Because the dead internet theory, the people who are presenting it, they're claiming it's 2016, 2017, right? Those are the years they're claiming the internet changed. But what if it changed in 2012, 2013? Like at this exact moment that supposedly nothing happened when the Mayan calendar was fizzed out. And of course, Mayan calendar, why, who's tracking this date, who's whatever. But for whatever reason, that was the presentation from the media, from the historians, from everything, that this is the correct date of the Mayan calendar. So they wanted us focused on December 21st, 2012. That's a date they wanted us focused on for one reason or another. So I started wondering, well, what if that, and even if it was just, that was the day the internet changed. That was the day we went from an original, open, interactive, communicative internet to what it's starting to become now, which is a completely homogenously controlled mechanism that you either know how to be a part of and play the rules by, or you're going to be at odds with, which means you're going to be at odds with reality. So that is where my little examination took me, and I'll see what you guys think of that.
All right, so that felt like a lot of information, but Laura said you didn't even use all your time. I think, is it my turn? Or is it Michael's turn?
Your turn.
My turn. Okay. So Howdie, I'm so glad you did this, because actually this was the topic of the conversation most of the way back here from Los Angeles with Laura and I, was this dead internet theory. So like a listener sent me some videos.
Right.
that we listened to that largely was some of the same information that we presented. And we started talking about all of this. And Laura has discovered a love for the term Potemkin village.
Oh, yeah. I didn't bring that up, but yeah, Potemkin village, right?
To insert that, and she just like the other night, she woke up in the middle of the night and looked at me and said, Potemkin village. She just thought, right. Right. So that it's funny that you kind of, and while it had occurred to me in relation to this article, I'm so glad that you went there, because we both went someplace different. So the first of all, yes, I think that is a great accompanying part to this, but also a cause as for why they would need to create fake media characters and actors that are no longer here and all of that kind of stuff. And it goes along with something that I think you and I have talked about a little bit, Michael, and I know I've talked with other people, is where are we sure that there are as many people in the world as we've been told or that used to be here, because they can't find people to fill jobs, right? Like my friend Jeff, when we were traveling with him last year, we kept finding all of these beautiful brand new apartment buildings that were totally empty, hundreds of units in them, totally empty and whatnot. So are there as many people? Is everything less populated than it used to be? And the only way that they've kept us distracted from this is this distortion that we've experienced over the course of the last year and a half, where people have to stand apart and you're supposed to stay home, and there's not, right? So there's a reason why there wouldn't be as many people out on the street. I feel like those things go together as well. And I remember exactly what you're talking about. I used to, and for me, it's easy to time a lot of this stuff because I lived in different places at different times. And so I kind of compartmentalized, when I was living here. When I was living downtown Los Angeles between 2011 and 2013, that was when I did some of my deepest internet dives. I had done some before and some after, but that was the biggest. It was the height of my drug use, and I was isolated and hyper-focused because I was into using meth, and I could stay on the same rabbit trail for 3.5 days, right? And I could get down into the really, the doldrums of the internet through some of these searches. And you're right, it's not like that anymore. And a lot of those things I used to be able to find, I can't find them now unless, because I have a very good memory, I can remember a particular sentence that was said and I search that sentence. And then suddenly I find my way to these web pages that look very, very different than web pages look today. And one could say that that is a function of times having changed, but another way of looking at it is it actually coming from another internet? That this internet will give you access to understand, right? It's like if you know that there's a secret door, right? And the secret door is you have to say the code phrase, right? So I sometimes remember odd phrases or maybe that was the first place I ever heard an idea or a concept. And so I just type that in and then I'm able to find it, but it literally looks like it comes from another time, right? And so, so that part of it. The other thing that is a huge part of this dead internet theory is the rotting links, right? You literally can't, even when you go to a page that has links, if you click on the links, a lot of them aren't there. And one of the parts that's really disturbing about it is a lot of them are links to things that are supposedly governmental information, Supreme Court decisions, things like that. So we can't actually find what the truth or what the finding was or kind of thing like that. So all that stuff is interesting. And I suggest that if you have a good memory and you can remember strange phrases, you might be able to find some of this stuff, but not everybody does have that. And yes, the internet, what happened to me is my life changed. I got healthier, I got busier, so I don't have time to do deep searches anymore. So I didn't realize until this thing came out that you literally can't go past page 23 anymore. It's not just that I don't, because I don't have time, right?
Right.
I'm sure that I'm not the only person who that's happened to, right? We've all become busier with something or another that we think is more important than what we used to do. And so we don't spend the kind of time we used to maybe. Your point about Grease is fascinating. I've never seen the movie Grease, but now I'm interested to see the movie Grease. But what we're talking John Travolta and Tom Cruise, right? So Tom Cruise did the deepfake, John Travolta is in Grease, correct? John Travolta. So people are both Scientologists.
Yep.
And, one of the things that I'm very well aware of is that, so obviously military intelligence, L. Ron Hubbard, Navy, he was buddies with Parsons and all that kind of stuff. He was running a lot more of what would be sort of the MK Ultra kind of wing of some of that kind of stuff. But the hospital that I was born at, Cedars of Lebanon, which is now called Cedars Sinai, which is where a lot of the mind control activity takes place, it moved locations, and what is there now is the Church of Scientology, right? Like just shortly after I was born, it moved, the Cedars changed names and moved locations, and the Church of Scientology is there. And it seems like wherever I go, you know, for many, many years, it seems to be a little different now. Like I'd move someplace and 2 days later, a Scientology office would open up, right? Like it was the most bizarre thing. But I think people, like, we're trained by the media to think of Scientology as one thing and to sort of like have this opposition to it based on the things like how weird Tom Cruise is and the things that Leah Remini says and whatever. But I think a lot of these technologies were you know, coming through or being experimented through Scientology before they were presented in reality. So the idea that Tom Cruise and John Travolta are both coming up in this story, I think is interesting. And you know, Scientology is there's a lot of layers to Scientology. And then your question about, you know, 2012, what happened? Randy and I used to talk about this. I've talked about with a number of friends and guests, are we already dead? Are we just sitting around here like trying to make sense of the afterlife? Like we think we're trying to discover the truth about reality, but are we really just trying to come to terms with the fact that maybe we're already dead? And I know one of your favorite shows to talk about is Lost. And that's the idea sort of presented there, is it like they died in the plane crash, but they had to do all of this sort of creating, you know, of this sort of fake reality so that they could, you know, have this experience and whatnot, right? And then, right? So there's that. And then the other thing I wanted to say, and we'll move on, is have you ever had a conversation with a gentleman named Daniel Berdichevsky?
Nope.
Okay, I'm 100% sure he listens to your content. He has a very small YouTube channel called Dreams and Other Stuff. I've had him on my show a couple of times. He's really interesting. He's an incredibly gifted lucid dreamer. And we did a show where he was telling me about this dream that he had, where basically something happened to the outside of the earth and they moved people to like a fake world on the inside. So there's a couple of different layers. There's some people that are almost being held in this mid-level, like in stasis. And then others have been moved into this sort of, they're in the inner earth, but they're living in a simulation through projection. They're being held in something, but they're living in a simulated reality. And then there's a few other people who, for some reason, their bodies, and for some reason or another, was able to handle what happened. And they are in the simulation, but in their real bodies. Like they're real when everybody else is a projected thing. And that the Mandela effects exist so that to see if the people that are real can tell the difference between the simulated reality and the not. And even upon occasion, like we go out to the actual surface earth again because it's almost been repaired and we're getting ready to be returned to it. So like we'll be kind of going, you know how we have those days sometimes where it's like the world feels like it used to feel when we were little, and then the next day we get the total simulated bullcrap. Right? That there's a group of people who are being sort of, you know, who are awake in the game and who are being moved back and forth between the real reality and the simulated reality, or maybe it's levels of the simulation or whatnot, right? And the way he has his own video about some of this, but then we went deeper into this in the show we did together. And that part of this process has been, you know, like the technology needs people like you and I and Michael who question things to understand if this is if they're able to perceive the difference or not, right? And so maybe we're like, some of us are live players or wake players in the game, while others are sort of sleep play, you know, for lack of a better term, NPCs, or they're living like in projected fake bodies, kind of like in that Bruce Willis movie, what was that one called that we watched? They were like in their houses in a pod, and then there was like a fake body of them out on the street that their consciousness was projected into. So some of these ideas, but this comes to mind as well, right? So I think there's all sorts of things at play here, both with technology and then our own perceptions and like I don't know if it's like shortcomings or just the, you know, like we're humans and we have feelings, and sometimes it makes us not able to see the forest for the trees, right? And so it's a kind of cluster of all of these kinds of things, but I'm so glad you went in that direction with it. It was really good. I enjoyed your presentation, and those are my thoughts.
Thanks. I'll just say two quick things, and then I'll take Michael because I'm curious what he's got to say. The first was one of the interesting things I got on this dead internet theory was on a guy's channel called All Time, and he's got 144,000 subscribers. I don't know him. I'd never seen him before this. Really interesting channel. He talks about the Mandela effect. He's talking about this idea called quantum in quantum immortality, a whole bunch of really interesting stuff. But he's got two things on this dead internet theory. That's the one I watched and got the most information. So if anybody's interested, you can see where that came from.
That's where we watched them too. I'll link them in the description.
Yeah. Okay. And the other thing that made me think a little bit too is I was wondering, when you talk about these different places, different realities, 2011, 2012, I wonder when the sun changed. I wished we could track when the sun went from being yellow to being white, because maybe that would, if we could actually know the year, that I wished I had been tracking the sun when I was living more closely to have known what was the year. What was the year that we stopped having the sun of our youth and we have the sun now that we have that's more like a lamp? That might have also told us a whole lot of other things of when things changed, what happened, and when and what was going on.
So I'll say that, so that's part of how I decide. Some days I feel like I'm in the old reality when the sun is very golden. You get those days once in a while. And then the other times we're in the white sun reality. But
Right.
I will say, because of my time is compartmentalized based on remembering where I lived and when I was using drugs and whatnot, when I moved back from downtown Los Angeles to my childhood home with my father, it was in 2013. And that was the first time I really remember noticing the white sun. Doesn't mean it couldn't have happened a little earlier. I was pretty much locked in an apartment in downtown LA. When I moved back in with him, I started going for walks because I was living in a suburban area and whatnot. But like, I'd say that I first noticed it sometime around 2013. So it very well could have been that 2012 point. And I started to notice that the sun was white. It looked like shimmery. It looked weird in the way that like the new pennies look compared to the old pennies, right? That kind of thing. Like, it was just bizarre. And it was when I was on those walks during that period of time that I really started focusing on it.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, what do you got?
All right. First thing is, now I understand why you asked me the question which you asked me. Like, you know, just like you're going to the nature of our reality, or the nature of our experience, you know, what's going on. Wow. So I like to, you gave me a lot of food for thought. Probably after this call, I'm going to think about it some more. Specifically because of an experience I had this weekend. I told you that I went down to Williamsburg, and to get to Williamsburg from where I live, you have to go around DC. And I used to live in DC. I moved from DC maybe 2003. And I've got a really good memory. I have a particularly good memory as it relates to spatial memory. Like, I'm really, like, I go into a mall once and I know where every shop is. I'll never forget that. And I remember buildings, and I have an immensely clear memory of a certain building, of a certain location. And when I drove by DC this weekend, I saw that building where it shouldn't have been. And it was like one of those moments where, like, I'm forced with it. I'm like, is it that my memory is not as good as what I think it is? And you know, because this happens, like, people remember things false. Like, there are real false memories. So like, that's a possibility, or something else going on. And either way, it put me at an uncomfortable, like, internal fork in the road, because if my memory was false about that, like truly false about that, well, then you have to ask yourself, well, what other memories are you certain about are false? So you have to ask yourself that. Or the other question, which I really didn't want to go down too much, which is, has something fundamentally changed? Like, you know, I like to play with that idea a lot, but I don't necessarily go into it like, you know, I do it more as an abstract mental exercise, as opposed to like, guess what? Like, something really crazy kind of happened and you're trying to figure your way through it. That is and so I guess in response to your presentation, I'm going to just share like some of my own personal things, because I'm going to speak just kind of, you know, like, this is therapy right now. I'm going to tell you what is coming up in my mind. When I was working in Washington, in DC, I actually lived in Arlington, if you're familiar with the area. And I worked at companies. There were probably 3 companies, which I lived there for 10 years, and there are 3 companies. I lived there probably like mid 20s to mid 30s is when I lived there in my age. And they were all technology companies, but they weren't like technology contractors or anything like that. They were the literal infrastructure providers of the internet. So when you talk about the internet, like the internet's a really interesting idea because you're like, well, are you talking about the, the internet experience? Are you talking about like the websites that exist on the internet? Are you talking about the actual like literal infrastructure that creates like, the nodes and the routers? So I was working on that in a marketing position, not a technology position, but I was working at that level. And in fact, and this is one of the things which is always like in my mind, I came to find out years later that the building which I worked in housed something which was called May East. So in the actual infrastructure of the internet, there's May East and May West, Metropolitan Access Exchange. It's where all of the big providers exchange their traffic. And so top secret sort of stuff, because the whole idea behind the internet is if you would blow it up, like, it would be able to like route traffic all the way around it, except these were the 2 weak spots, one in California, one in DC. And I worked in that building. It was just an office building in Tyson's Corner. And so it was in Tyson's Corner where I saw the wrong building. It's in Tyson's Corner when I think about all this stuff, like, why do I kind of know these things? So when you begin to ask this question about the internet and like, the dead internet theory. So interestingly enough, I saw that same video this past week, the dead internet theory by the website you mentioned.
Yeah.
I have not watched a video on the internet for about a year, maybe even longer than that. I can't, there's something inside me which won't let me watch it. With after 30 seconds, my mind just shuts off. I can't watch it. I don't know what it is, but I just know that my behavior is that way. I was able to watch more of that video than anything else I've watched. So the very fact, if I recall, the release date was in September 21st of this year. So it's relatively recent, but we were all kind of in that space at this time. So I find that at least coincidental. But the only thing I can say out of, that actually, the last time the 3 of us got together, we talked about the Field of Dreams, and the Field of Dreams opened up something in me, and I ran with that. In fact, I went and I gave a pretty big presentation. Like what started as my presentation here expanded into something much, much greater and showed itself in my experiential reality. And my sense is you've done it again, Howdie, because you've done something with this information, which is like really kind of getting me thinking. But as opposed to that one, which was more like external, this one feels immensely personal. I don't know what's going on. I think that's a very interesting idea about these different internets. And then, what does that say about reality? Are we dead? I'm going to, rather to stop talking about me, I'm going to then end at this last thing. As you were talking about finding websites in 2012, I had a flashback to, I remember there was a person who I was interested in right around the 2011 timeframe, 2010. I followed a lot of their work and I found them interesting, and I can't remember who they are and I can't find them anymore. And I'm not even certain what the name was, but I'm curious if either of you are familiar with who I'm talking about. I want to say his name was either John or maybe like Johann. The last name was Calleh. Oh, I can't remember, but it was like a really kind of different take of like Mayan and 2012 and different dates. Like,
so the one that I know is that I used to love listening to, and he died, was named Eon XL Lungold, right? And
it wasn't him. It wasn't him. But I'm wondering if the guy I'm talking about, like, why can't I find him anymore? But go on, Emily.
So, but it was about that time I found some interesting stuff around that too. And so because of ENXL Lungold, I started looking and listening to other people. And while I don't know for sure if it's the same one, it was around that period. And I was on some of those kinds of things too, with the cycles of times, and there was some interesting stuff.
I want to go back, and based upon what Howdie shared with us, I want to see if I can find that information again. And I want to see if my memory is what I think my memory is, and see, one, if I could find it, and two, if like that information, which I found so compelling, because I want to say he gave alternative dates and then he was like turned out to be a fraud, but nonetheless, like, fraud. I want to look at that again. So if anyone who's listening to this knows who I'm talking about, I want to say his name was like, he may,
How about Maurice Cotterell?
his initials are definitely JC, and his last
JC.
name is CA, and there's like L's and there's an H in it. Like I'm thinking Calhoun, but it's not Calhoun. I want to say the guy was European, and he may have been like Southern Europe. Like I'm thinking
I'm saying this
Portuguese.
because I think I remember something of who you're talking about, but I also can't think who this is. And they may have written a book, right? I think they've written a book, a book that was like maybe sold like 500 copies or 1,000 copies. It was very, it was around, but you could never find it. I get a sense. I think I know who you're talking about, but yeah, a name.
We're all talking about this like 2012 person who's like right on the periphery of our memories. Like this is where it's getting like this whole idea, like spillover of what this internet, what this dead internet theory is. Like, is there something in our memories which are also beyond? Like, what are we even pointing at? Like I'm telling you, Howdy, you sent me down a path right now. So we'll see what happens. If you can remember that person's name, or if Emily, you can remember the person's name who you were thinking about, I'll send it to me, because I'd be curious to just touch upon those and see what I can find and what is triggered, because seemingly when the three of us get together, I can only speak for myself, like it definitely sparks something new, which I haven't had prior to the conversation. So thank you for that, Howdy, and thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your original approach to our topics.
Yeah, and we're all going to go watch Grease now.
By the way, without a doubt, Grease was so instrumental in my childhood. I don't know why, but it is.
Interesting.
The movie.
So I just wanted to, Howdy, did you have anything else you wanted to respond to Michael with?
No, I don't think so. Other than it's similar. I mean, when I sort of bumped into this thing too, I know there's something there. Whatever they're calling this dead internet theory, there's something really important there. It's not. No one has figured. I'd say no one's figured it out really yet. Whatever it is, it's still very much on the periphery of exploration. So, sorry.
Maybe I'll put it here so people can actually hear what I'm saying. So. Yeah, there's something really important there with it. No one's found it out yet, and maybe in time we will. But I don't think the answer is just sitting out there. You can click somewhere, call somebody, and you're going to know what this is all about. This is going to take some work.
I would agree.
Okay, so a couple of things I wanted to say in response to what you said, Michael. So what you just said happened on your trip. The same thing happened on our trip. Like a part that you and I did a show on when I moved here from Los Angeles to Austin, like remember the sex speakeasy that we talked about? Gone. So something that was like amazing. Before
I had an opportunity to visit.
Right. So we had a whole show about these things that you find on road trips. But not only that, the order that things were laid out in between Phoenix and Tucson were different. Not only it's possible one could say, okay, I could have had a memory from last time that was incorrect, except for we documented a lot of it, right, as I went. But also I used to live in Tucson, and I used to drive from Tucson to Phoenix all the time. And I'm telling you, things were in different places. There was different freeway exit names. There was all kinds of weird stuff going on in this little section from Phoenix to Tucson, which happens to also be an area where there was a Toltec population at one point, which goes into some of this, which is kind of interesting. But Laura and I were having this same conversation. I was like alternately freaking out that, like, because my memory is very important to me, alternately freaking out, and then also playing with, okay, what could really be going on here, right? And just like you said about how sometimes this has happened before, but it like presents a scenario that's like external to us. This one felt really personal to all the things going on in my life right now. And for sometimes it's not like what you're focused on, but when you're focused on. And it happens to be that what I'm focused on right now, because I'm giving a presentation on it at Robert's thing this weekend, is the series Twin Peaks, right? And all of this stuff, including suddenly there's a road named Twin Peaks in the area of the road between Tucson and Phoenix that wasn't there before, right? And if you think about what Twin Peaks is, I don't know if either of you have watched all of the series. If not, if you have, I'd say maybe even it's worth a rewatch. But I actually think that there's almost nothing more pertinent to what's going on for us right now than that series. And it's showing itself in like almost every experience I have every day. And I don't know why I chose to rewatch it now, right? I had watched it originally and it was on in 1989, the earlier parts of it. And it's been out, the new part has been out for a couple of years, but for some reason my mind went to it now. And it's really informative to the topics which we are sort of speaking about right now. And then I also want to go back, something else occurred to me while you were talking, Howdie, and then I came back when Michael was talking, so I'm going to go with it. Also during that time when I was living downtown, it was like in the 2011, 2012 period, and we started hearing a lot of stuff about like changing how the internet is controlled, the ICANN with the different internet addresses and whatnot. Remember that? That was part of one of Obama's things, that he transferred control of the internet. Remember that? And I remember listening to a lot of shows where people were talking about that there was going to be a new internet coming, an internet 2.0, that was going to be more like a pay to play kind of internet, right? Where like there would be one internet for the people that was freely available. And then the other internet was going to be, you had to pay to access it if you wanted to see all the stuff that used to be there, or if you wanted like the more, say, free speech internet, right? So there was going to be a controlled one and a free speech one. And you know, like I listened to several people talk about this at that time, and everybody was afraid that like at the moment the internet got transferred to this other thing, it was going to be noticeable. They were going to start censoring everything. Well, that didn't happen, but that might be around the time when all those other parts of the internet went away. Right. And we just didn't notice because like it wasn't then that Alex Jones was canceled. It was just like 2 years ago. Right. It wasn't, you know, they let the noisy voices and some of the crazier conspirators, think about it. A lot of the really crazy conspiratorial content about like everything being fake and whatever came in that post 2011, 2012 period of time. Right. And we were focused on, okay, that's the stuff that we're afraid they're going to, I mean, not that we were personally afraid, right? But there was a lot of noise being made about that's the part that's going to be censored. We weren't thinking that like literally parts of the internet would disappear. Right. So my question is something coming where we're going to have access back to that portion of the internet if we want to pay for it? Or is that going to be part of like a reward or carrot stick? Maybe or maybe it's even going to be the other way. Maybe people who don't buy into all the other stuff will somehow find their way back to the other internet if they learn how to ask the question correctly. Like I was saying, if you search for the funny phrase, it's all there. But if you're just looking to be easily guided to information you think is good, tough shit, doesn't work that way. So is that possible? That's going to happen, that we're going to have to pay our way into it or earn our way into this other internet. And then there's also this whole like idea of like a blockchain internet that might be different than this other one, an internet where things can't be taken away. So has this restriction of the internet occurred to be able to sell us on the idea of blockchaining the entire internet, right? So I think that these are all things to explore for each of us. But Michael, as you say, you're going to dig further into some of this. But I think if we go back to that same period of time, 2011, 2012, that was when all the controversy about who was going to be running the internet was happening as well. And if there was going to be an internet 2.0 and what would 2.0 mean? And the other question is, does internet 2.0 already exist and we just somehow don't know about it? And that there are some people who do, right? And they're keeping it a secret. It's kind of like, you know, whatever the Masons are doing, they're not telling, you know, like the inner circle or the secret societies or whatever it is, right? It's there if you can figure it out, or if you are, you know, invited into the club or whatever. And if not, it's not. And now we are aware that this is going on a different level. And so now we can start to unravel this mystery, right? So.
All right, my friends.
I guess we've touched a ton of topics here. So
we've touched a ton of topics. You've got me thinking. I think we've shared a little bit. We've pained a little bit. We've grown a little bit. And hopefully everyone else who's watched it has gone through that same emotional roller coaster. And I can't wait to see what happens next month. I don't even know what internet we're going to be on.
All right, guys. So Michael, I think next time is your turn again. So we will all wait with bated breath to see what you come up with. And I want to thank the listeners and the two of you for another enjoyable morning spent, really going into some really interesting places. So thank you, everybody. Howdie, before we go, remind everybody what you're doing, where you can find you, all that jazz.
Yeah, it's still on YouTube, like you guys are still there. Howdie McCoskey Talks. Some stuff is also going over to the site freevoice.io. My books are still for sale on Amazon. Various websites are still running. If you actually Google my name, they'll come up. So that still works for me at this point. So yeah.
Michael?
You could always find me at susquehannaalchemy.com. We're recording this on the 14th of October, on the 31st of October. If anyone is in the Mid-Atlantic area, I'll be doing a live presentation for the first time I've done in a very long time. I'll include a link for that as well. So I'd love to see people come out. There's limited space for that, but that's basically all I got to share today.
You can always find Michael and I both here for Project Kids and playing the Glass Bead Game. You can find me right here on Emily Moyer on YouTube or emilycmoyer.com. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, audience. We will see you next time. Take care.